It all started when I, a broke college student looking for some extra cash, agreed to house sit over spring break. Seemed like an easy gig, just chill in a fancy mansion for a week, right? Wrong. Dead wrong. So this distant relative I barely knew existed hits me up out of the blue with an offer I couldn't refuse. They needed someone to watch over their empty mansion, the Blackwood Manor, deep in the woods. The email was vague, bordering on cryptic, but promised a fat paycheck in return. Naturally, my broke self jumped at the opportunity. As I rolled up to Blackwood Manor, I couldn't shake the sinking feeling in my gut. The place looked straight out of a horror movie, a creepy old mansion surrounded by nothing but trees for miles. The driveway stretched on forever, and the closer I got, the more the mansion seemed to loom over me, like it was watching my every move. I pushed open the creaky iron gates and stepped into the courtyard, feeling like I'd just walked into a haunted house at a theme park. The whole place was eerily quiet, with not even the wind daring to rustle the leaves. I hesitated a moment, wondering if it was too late to bail, but the promise of cold, hard cash kept me moving forward. Inside, Blackwood Manor was straight up spooky. It was like stepping back in time to the Victorian era, with dusty old furniture covered in moth-eaten sheets and creepy-ass portraits staring at me from every wall. I tried to shake off the heebie-jeebies crawling up my spine, reminding myself it was just an old house, but damn if it didn't feel like it was alive. The first few days were pretty uneventful. I wandered around the mansion, poking my nose into rooms that hadn't seen daylight in God knows how long. But as the days dragged on, things started getting weird. I'd hear footsteps echoing in empty hallways when I knew for a fact I was alone. Doors would creak open on their own, slamming shut behind me with a force that made my heart skip a beat. And then there were the whispers, soft, barely audible voices that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. At first, I brushed it off as my overactive imagination playing tricks on me. But the longer I stayed in that damn mansion, the harder it became to ignore the feeling that something was seriously wrong. Then came the night that changed everything. I was dead asleep when a blood-curdling scream ripped through the silence, jolting me awake so fast I nearly fell out of bed. My heart was pounding like a jackhammer as I stumbled into the hallway, following the sound to its source, the locked door at the end of a deserted corridor. My hands were shaking as I fumbled for the key, unlocking the door with a click that sounded deafening in the silence. I swung the door open, revealing a staircase that led down into darkness. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to turn back, but something compelled me forward, deeper into the bowels of the mansion. As I descended into the cellar, the air grew colder, thicker, like I was wading through a pool of ice. Cobwebs brushed against my face, and the stench of decay filled my nostrils, making me gag. And then I saw them. Two glowing orbs staring back at me from the shadows. I froze, my blood turning to ice as the orbs drew closer, revealing a twisted, nightmarish figure that seemed to defy all logic and reason. It was like something straight out of my nightmares, a creature from the depths of hell itself. I wanted to run, to scream for help, but my body was frozen in place, paralyzed by fear. And then, with a sudden rush of movement, the creature lunged at me, its claws outstretched, ready to tear me apart. But just as suddenly as it appeared, it vanished into thin air, leaving me alone in the darkness. I stumbled back up the stairs, my mind reeling with terror and confusion. What the hell had I just seen? Was I losing my mind, or was there something truly evil lurking in the walls of Blackwood Manor? In the days that followed, I was plagued by nightmares, visions of unspeakable horrors that left me trembling and drenched in sweat. I tried to convince myself it was all just a trick of the mind, a product of spending too much time alone in a creepy old mansion. But deep down, I knew the truth. Blackwood Manor was haunted, and I was its latest victim. I don't know what happened to the mansion after that, and honestly, I don't want to. Some things are better left buried in the past. Blackwood Manor is one of them. But even now, years later, the memory still haunts me, reminding me that some nightmares never really end. And as I sit here, recounting my tale for whoever will listen, I can't help but wonder if Blackwood Manor is still standing, still waiting for its next victim to stumble into its dark embrace. When I was a child, I had a friend named Lucy. She was a neighborhood girl who would come over to my grandmother's house, which was where I lived at the time. There was a park by my house that had a deep creek next to it. I couldn't swim, so we always had to have an adult with us when we were near the creek. Lucy was a toxic friend, but I didn't know at the time. She would always threaten to stop being friends with me or stop talking to me if I didn't do what she wanted. She would always say that she deserved my toys and my family and friends more than I did. I didn't mind this, as I had a hard time making friends, and Lucy was one of my only friends. One night, Lucy came over and she said she was bored and wanted to go to the park. I told her my family was in the backyard and we had to have an adult with us to go, but she said she would leave and never come back if I didn't go to the park with her. I followed her and we went to the park. She walked right past the playground equipment to the creek, and I asked her what she was doing. She said she wanted to swim, and I told her I couldn't swim, and she called me a string of hurtful names, including weak, stupid, and an awful friend. This really hurt my 5-year-old self, so I started crying. This made her even angrier, and she told me something I'll never forget. "You're an awful child. Your family deserved me and not you." I was so confused and sad that I just ran home. I never saw her again, and I just thought she was so angry she really never spoke to me again. Now, about a year ago, my family was talking about my many imaginary friends, and my mom said my friend Lucy really creeped her out, because she was supposed to have a daughter before me who they wanted to name Lucy. My mother had a miscarriage, and Lucy was never born. I remember it like it was yesterday, even though it's been years since those chilling nights. It started innocently enough, as many childhood tales often do, with an imaginary friend, but this wasn't your typical imaginary friend. This was something far more sinister, something that still sends shivers down my spine when I think about it. His name was Isaac, or at least that's what I called him. I was around 7 years old when he first appeared. My parents had just moved us into an old house on the outskirts of town, a place with creaky floorboards and drafty corridors. I didn't have any friends yet, so I suppose my young mind conjured up Isaac as a companion. At first, Isaac seemed harmless enough. He would appear in my room at night, a shadowy figure lurking in the corners, whispering secrets only I could hear. He told me stories of faraway lands and adventures beyond my wildest dreams. But as the nights went on, Isaac's tales grew darker, his whispers turning into chilling murmurs that seemed to seep into my very soul. I tried to tell my parents about Isaac, but they dismissed him as a figment of my imagination, just a phase I would soon outgrow. But Isaac wasn't just a product of childhood fantasy. He was something far more real and sinister than they could ever imagine. As the weeks passed, Isaac's presence became more oppressive, his whispers more insistent. He would tell me things, horrible things that no child should ever hear. He spoke of death and despair, and of things lurking in the shadows waiting to consume me whole. I began to dread the night, knowing that when darkness fell, Isaac would come. I would lie in bed paralyzed with fear as he whispered his dark secrets into the silence of my room. And then, one night, he asked me to do something unspeakable, something that would change everything. I won't repeat what he asked of me, for even now the memory fills me with dread. Suffice to say, it was something that no innocent child should ever be asked to do. But in that moment of fear and confusion, I found the strength to defy Isaac and banish him from my life forever. It wasn't easy, and for a time I feared he would never leave me alone. But eventually, his whispers faded into the darkness, and I was left alone once more. My parents never knew the truth of what happened those nights, and I never spoke of Isaac again. But sometimes late at night, when the house is quiet and the shadows grow long, I can still feel his presence lurking in the darkness, waiting and watching, biding his time until he can return once more. And I pray that he never can, for I fear that if he ever does, I may not have the strength to resist him again. Months passed without any sign of Isaac. I convinced myself that it was all a childhood delusion, a product of an overactive imagination trying to cope with the loneliness of a new home. Yet, as I grew older, a nagging feeling persisted, a sense of unease that I couldn't shake. It was during my 13th birthday that Isaac returned. I had almost forgotten about him, buried his memory deep within the recesses of my mind. But on that night, as I blew out the candles on my cake, I felt a chill run down my spine. The sensation of being watched. I brushed it off as paranoia, blaming it on the darkness and the flickering candlelight. But as I climbed into bed that night, I knew something was wrong. The air in my room felt heavy, oppressive, as if a storm was brewing just beyond the horizon. And then I heard it. A faint whisper, barely audible above the sound of my own heartbeat. "Hello, old friend," it said, the voice sending shivers down my spine. I froze, unable to move as the whispers grew louder, filling the room with their dark presence. Isaac was back, and he was more powerful than ever. His whispers were no longer just words. They were commands, urging me to do things I knew I shouldn't. I tried to resist, to push him away, but it was like trying to hold back the tide with my bare hands. Night after night, Isaac's presence grew stronger, his whispers more insistent. I couldn't escape him, couldn't find solace in sleep or sanctuary in the light of day. He was everywhere, a shadowy specter haunting my every waking moment. I became a shell of my former self, consumed by fear and paranoia. I stopped going to school, stopped leaving my room altogether. My parents grew concerned, but their words fell on deaf ears. They couldn't see Isaac. They couldn't hear his whispers echoing in the darkness. And then one night, everything changed. I woke to find myself standing in the middle of my room with a knife clutched tightly in my hand. Isaac stood before me, his eyes burning with otherworldly fire. "Do it," he whispered, his voice cold and unyielding. "Do it, and we can be together forever." I wanted to resist, wanted to fight back against the darkness that threatened to consume me. But it was too late. With a trembling hand, I raised the knife and plunged it into my chest, the pain searing through me like a white, hot flame. As darkness closed in around me, I heard Isaac's laughter echoing in my ears, a chilling reminder of the horrors that lurked just beyond the edge of reality. And as I slipped into unconsciousness, I knew that I would never truly be free from his grasp, that his whispers would haunt me for all eternity. Spring break had finally arrived, and my friends and I were eager to escape the confines of our dorms and embark on adventure. Sarah, Jack, Emily, Mike, and I had been planning our trip for months, and we settled on a remote cabin deep in the woods for our getaway. If only we had any idea what we were actually in for. As we drove deeper into the wilderness, excitement bubbled up within me. The towering trees and winding roads seemed to whisper tales of hidden mysteries and untold secrets. Sarah, our fearless leader, couldn't contain her enthusiasm, sharing stories of past adventures and promising an unforgettable spring break. After what felt like forever, we finally made it to the cabin, which was deep in the woods, buried in trees. The air was thick with anticipation as we unloaded our belongings and settled in, but as night fell, we all started to feel a bit uneasy. Jack was the first to voice his concerns. He's pretty much always smiling, so you know if he looks serious that something is wrong. He said he kept hearing strange noises outside the cabin, rustling leaves and snapping twigs and what sounded like footsteps walking around his window. Sarah, who is known to be optimistic, promised it must have just been some wildlife like a deer that was walking by. But as the night wore on, we only got more uncomfortable. Emily, trying to calm us down, suggested that we go for a walk and just go outside and investigate ourselves. There has to be a logical explanation for this, she said. So we all agreed, reluctantly. But as long as we all stayed together, what really could happen, right? We grabbed flashlights and ventured out into the darkness, and the forest felt like a living creature itself. Moments after we left the cabin, a piercing scream shattered the quiet of the night, and we all froze in our steps. It sounded like Sarah, but as we all turned around, she was nowhere to be found. We'd only taken a few steps out the cabin, but Sarah was gone. We went back inside, but the phone lines were dead. Yes, this was all taking place at a time long before everyone had an iPhone in their pocket. We tried to talk things through overnight and even went back out in search of Sarah, but we never found her or any clue of where she could have gone. Nobody slept a wink that night, and as soon as the sun began to rise, we knew we needed to head out to seek help. I think we were all trembling. I know my heart was racing as we made the long walk back to civilization. We ended up filing a missing persons report for Sarah, but her disappearance was never solved. There was not a single clue that told us where she could have been. Some people from school whispered that we must have done something to her, but we loved Sarah. We would do anything to have her back. Jack became more and more withdrawn, and Emily dove into her studies. School became the only thing she would talk or think about. Mike had descended into a spiral of paranoia, and he was convinced that whatever had taken Sarah was coming for the rest of us too. Eventually, one of us found an old newspaper article, dated several decades before, that told the story of a family that had disappeared without a trace while living in the same remote cabin that we had stayed. According to the article, the family had reported strange occurrences in the weeks leading up to their disappearance. Unexplained noises, voices in the night, and a horrible feeling of dread like they were being watched or hunted, despite their best efforts to escape or find help. They seemed to be consumed by the same malevolent force that had come later for Sarah. I hope she's alive and that she's okay. And I pray that I will never encounter that horrible monster again.